United States gets fully involved in Vietnam, we realize that there's one area that is a hotbed for enemy activity, and that is the Mekong River Delta. Now, the Mekong River starts way up in the Himalayas and it trickles across Southeast Asia until it empties out in the southern portion of Vietnam. Now, for the Viet Cong, it is very advantageous for them to hold on to the Mekong River Delta. It provides them a number of advantages that they will enjoy, because 60% of all agriculture in Vietnam is produced alongside the river delta. 30% of the population of Vietnam lives alongside the river delta. So for the VC, holding this means that they have that large population to recruit new manpower from to bolster their numbers. They can tax this population to fund their war machine. They can use that agriculture to feed their military. And they can use the river delta itself to smuggle equipment and resources out and into the river delta. So, in 1966, we enact Operation Game Warden. Operation Game Warden is the creation of our Brown Water Navy. These men will call themselves the River Rats. Now, the Brown Water Navy, their job is to try to curb and destroy the enemy influence in the Mekong River Delta. This is the first time that the United States military will have to conduct riverine warfare since the American Civil War 100 years back. So we will be producing some boats to help us with this job. And we have two of these boats on display here. So the first of the boats we have on display is called a strike assault boat, a STAB. Now, as you can look at this boat, you can see that it's got a lot of firepower to this thing. You've got 4 machine guns, you got 3 M60s, a Browning 50 cal, and a grenade launcher. Now, this boat was used to try to eliminate enemy presence along the river banks. Additionally, it was used to also destroy contraband and search for equipment that was being smuggled into and out of the river. Now, I talked to one Vietnam War vet who got to operate on a strike assault boat, and he said that they had so much firepower on this boat that if the enemy was taking cover behind a tree line, they could use all their machine guns to just mow down these trees and destroy the tree line altogether. Additionally, that vet said that he carried 3 rocket launchers in his boat in case he really had to break some heads open. He himself carried a shotgun, and one of his buddies had a grease gun. Now, we have a larger boat behind our STAB. That is the PBR, Patrol Boat River. We're going to go up and get a closer look at the PBR, but as we do, we have some pictures of it down here. And I always like to highlight these pictures. This is a man called Wayne Salem. Wayne Salem, back then, you can tell he's a spry young fellow. He is a local Wyoming Vietnam War vet. Now, I actually had the opportunity to speak with him, and he operated on a PBR. So I've talked to Vietnam vets who operated both of these equipment here. Now, Wayne Salem, operating on that PBR, told me that fighting on a riverboat was a very dangerous job because you're pretty much exposed on a boat. You have no cover to hide behind. There's nowhere to go to. When the enemy shoots at you and you're on a boat, your only job is to really jump back on a gun and shoot back against the enemy. It's all you can do. Now, Wayne told me he was engaged in over 21 firefights with the enemy on his river boat. So he's very lucky that he came back alive or not severely wounded. Now let's get a closer look at our river boat up here. Yeah, those are voice recordings, but we're too big of a group to really hear the voice recordings.
It's okay.
We'll come back to it. So let's try to bunch up a little bit so you guys can get a good look at this boat. Oh my God.
Hi.
So, our PBR also has a fairly decent assortment of weaponry to use. You got 250 calibers on the gunner's bay. You've got an M60 spot right here, another 50 caliber with a grenade launcher on top of it. You've got a single shot grenade launcher. In fact, Wayne Salem told me that he even fired a mortar off of his boat while they were operating. So, as mentioned, when the enemy shot at you, you've got nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. You have to jump on a gun and shoot back because you are exposed. Now, you had 4 men operating the PBR, and each man was trained to do the job of the other. So, for example, if the captain of the boat was injured, another man could pilot this boat. Additionally, this boat moved through the water, not through propellers, but a kind of jacuzzi jet pod system on the bottom of the craft. So, despite its size, this is actually a fairly speedy vehicle. It operated very efficiently across the waters of the Mekong River Delta. In fact, Operation Game Warden would be an overall success. By 68 and 69, and this does coincide with us defeating the Viet Cong in the Tet Offensive, but by that time, we have also effectively rooted the Viet Cong out of the Mekong River Delta, and we have denied the enemy to use this location throughout the rest of the war. So, our ground water navy was a very effective unit. Now, alright. So, anytime I reach the end of my Vietnam tour, I try to do my best to help you guys understand just what our men had to go through in Vietnam and what they went through when they came back to the States. So, one thing to start off with is, as I mentioned, a lot of our men who were drafted in Vietnam were young American boys. They were between the ages typically of 18 to 21, and 19 to 20 was the average age of your drafted man. Now, these men were drafted into serving in Vietnam, so it wasn't really their choice. But they weren't going to burn their draft cards. They weren't going to run up to Canada. They got their call to duty, and they answered that call. So they would go serve their country in Vietnam. And what they did was very commendable. Now, out in Vietnam, whether you are serving on a helicopter, in the convoys, whether you're operating in the jungles, or you were involved in urban fighting, or in the Brown Water Navy, it is important to realize that everywhere our boys were operating in, these men were going through hell. They were working in tough environments, in tough conditions, and they were fighting against a determined enemy who wanted nothing more than to kill them. So our guys were put in a kill or be killed situation very constantly, very dangerous conditions. Now, at that age, you have no idea what you're trying to do with your life. So, if we look at the average age of the American soldier in World War II, that was 26 years old. At 26, you at least have an idea of what you're trying to do with yourself. But again, in Vietnam, these are young guys who came straight out of high school. So it's not fair the amount of duties and responsibilities that was thrust on top of their shoulders. Now, one other thing to take into consideration here is that unlike World War II and Korea, in which many of our men were in ocean liners as they were traveling back to the United States, they had about 2 to 3 weeks time to decompress and prepare for transition back to civilian life. In Vietnam, they did not have this opportunity. In fact, you could have been involved in a firefight 24 hours prior to your service ending before they jet you back home on a Freedom Bird to a civilian airport in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Denver. That is no time to decompress or retransition back to the civilian life. And after you landed, when you got off that plane, there were people sitting there waiting for you. However, these people weren't waiting to greet you with open arms. They weren't waiting to give you respect. Instead, they had signs. They were protesting your presence in Vietnam. They were assaulting our men verbally, even physically at times. They were spitting on them. They were calling them names like baby killers. So our men went to go risk life and limb for their country in Vietnam, only to come back to a country that no longer wanted anything to do with them. So what the hell did they go and serve for anyways? Now that's the thing to take into consideration here, is that they suffered hell out in Vietnam, and when they came back home, they were given nothing else but hell. And so these men didn't deserve that, because again, they never asked to be there. They were sent there, and they did their jobs damn good. Now, whether you agree with the war politically or not, you can never take it out on our service members. You cannot denigrate these men, because it's not their fault for being there. If you're going to take it out on anyone, you take it out on the politicians. They're the ones that usually can be blamed for our involvement in any kind of foreign entanglement. never take it out on our veterans. Because these men, they're just like you. They are human beings and they are suffering. But they go out there because they're going to suffer in your place. They're going to ensure that the American public back at home can enjoy the lifestyle that we get to have here, because they're the ones who are going to go through this pain and suffering so we don't have to. Now, sorry, get a little impassioned there. So, we're going to go over the stats of Vietnam now. From 1955 to 1975, we are looking at about 3.5 million American service personnel who served in Vietnam throughout these 2 decades. Now we're going to see a high number of these men, close to 1 million of those who served, come back home with a illness, injury, or even not come back home at all. So in our 2 decades in Vietnam, 58,220 Americans will die over in Vietnam. So they did the ultimate sacrifice. They gave life for their country. When we put that number with our 153 Americans wounded in action and our 1,500 Americans MIA, we're looking at about over 210,000 casualties now. Put that number with our 650,000 veterans treated for Agent Orange. That is the biggest of these numbers here, and they count as casualties because they got this condition out in Vietnam and they came back to the States with this life-altering condition. And in fact, as I mentioned, that is a lowball estimate. That is not going to include the men who died before they could receive treatment or to get diagnosed with Agent Orange. Additionally, we have another number down here, 271,000 veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Now that number is not going to include the men who either never opened up about their experience in Vietnam, which is actually very common. So, when these men went to Vietnam, they lost a piece of themselves out there in those jungles, and when they came back to the United States looking for support, when they saw what happened and said that they were taxed just for their service, they decided, I'm never going to talk about my time in Vietnam. I'm going to bring it to me to the grave. So it's very common to find Vietnam War vets who won't talk about their experience over there. So I believe this number is a very lowball estimate. It's probably twice as high, and we just don't know because half of these guys don't want to talk about their experience. But we're also going to see some of these men who are no longer here because they have committed suicide. Now, suicide rates among military veterans who have served in foreign wars is actually incredibly high. Whether we're looking at Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, it is still something we see with our military service personnel to this day. And it is tragic that these men feel that they have nobody else to turn to and that their only option is to take their own lives. As a country, we need to do better by our veterans. We need to do better by these men. We need to give them a helping hand and a voice that they can speak to. So when we put all these numbers together, we're looking at a casualty number that is at least close to 1,100,000 casualties out of these 3.5 million Americans who served. That's a little about one in a fourth men who came back with a casualty of some sort in the Vietnam conflict. So these men gave it their all. They went through hell, and the least we can do now as the American people is at least respect their dignity and thank them for their service to our country. So if you know a Vietnam War vet, give him a hug, and if he doesn't want a hug, thank him for his service. So this pretty much concludes the American experience in Korea and Vietnam and the Polar Gallery. Now, if you want to go back and see anything we went over, you are free to do so. Otherwise, we have our patent gallery outside these doors, and it's a very cool room. We've got some artifacts from World War I, so I do recommend going through this. And if you haven't had time to eat yet, we've got our Pula building next door, which is open until 6 p.m. They've got a lot of food options, soups, chicken sandwiches, hamburgers, and 18 different flavors of ice cream, so go nuts. Again, thank you guys for going on this tour with me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your stay at our museum.